A tree, inside it gold, diamonds, and something else, something that once belonged only to kings. The question is not where this jewelry came from. The question is, why did someone need to hide it? Who were they? The ones who walked into the darkness of the night, away from every watching eye, and buried their entire lives. Their entire history inside the chest of a living tree. And why? Did that tree stay silent? Decades passed, centuries passed, the tree kept growing, its rings grew deeper. And inside, the secret grew deeper with them. Then one day, the sound of a chainsaw, a flash of light, and the world saw something it was never meant to see. But the real question, the one that still has no answer, how did that jewelry find its way into the heart of a jungle? And the one who hid it there are places on this earth that don't give up their secrets easily. Places where the soil breathes differently, where the trees grow too thick, too close, as if they are conspiring, as if they have something to protect. The deep forests of the world have always been this way. Ancient, indifferent, patient in a way that no human being has ever managed to be. They outlive empires, they outlast wars. They watch civilizations rise like smoke and crumble like ash, and they say nothing. They simply grow taller, they simply grow wider. And sometimes they grow around the things we leave behind. This is a story about what trees remember. It begins the way all the greatest mysteries begin, not with a dramatic revelation, not with a headline, but with something small, something almost accidental. A logger in a dense, untouched stretch of woodland raises his chainsaw. The engine snarls. The blade bites into the bark of a tree that has stood in that forest for longer than anyone can calculate. And then the sound changes. The metal catches on something it wasn't supposed to find, something that does not belong inside a living tree. Something cold and hard and impossibly, hauntingly beautiful. He stops, he leans in. And there, embedded within the heartwood of that ancient tree, pressed so deep into the rings of its growth that the bark has sealed over it completely, is jewelry. Real jewelry. Intricate, extraordinary, breathtaking in its craftsmanship. The kind of work that doesn't come from a department store or a weekend market. The kind of work that comes from a civilization. The kind of work that comes from a dynasty. The air around that discovery carries a bite that feels less like weather and more like a warning. Because here's what most people don't understand about trees. When you look at a cross-section of a tree trunk, those rings, those concentric circles that scientists use to measure time, each ring represents 1 year of that tree's life. 1 year of rain and drought and sun and shadow. The tree grows outward, always outward, adding one thin layer of itself with every passing season. And if something is left against the bark of that tree, a nail, a chain, a piece of metal, a piece of history, the tree does not reject it. The tree does not push it away. The tree grows around it. Slowly, silently, with the infinite patience of something that does not know what urgency means. It consumes the object, it makes it part of itself. Given enough decades, given enough centuries, that object will no longer be sitting against the tree. It will be inside the tree, locked within its rings. Preserved in the most unexpected vault nature has ever constructed. And now the question that should keep every thinking person awake at night: what else have the trees been hiding? To understand what was found, and more importantly, why it was hidden, you have to understand the world as it existed before the hiding happened. You have to travel backward through those rings, through those years, through those centuries of silence. Throughout human history, there have always been moments of absolute catastrophe. Moments when a people, a family, a civilization looked at the horizon and saw not tomorrow but annihilation. Moments when armies swept across borders like floods across dry land. Moments when conquerors arrived with fire in their hands and demanded everything: the land, the gold, the heritage, the very memory of those who had lived there before. In those moments, human beings did what human beings have always done when faced with the impossible. They hid, they buried, they concealed. They protected the things they could not carry and could not surrender. The great hiding places of human history are legendary. The Dead Sea Scrolls tucked into limestone caves. The treasures of Troy buried beneath layer after layer of forgotten cities. The Nazi-looted gold sunk into the depths of alpine lakes. But the forest has always been the hiding place that history forgets to look for. Because forests are inconvenient, because forests are dangerous. Because forests change, paths disappear, landmarks vanish, the person who knew the way often didn't survive long enough to lead anyone back. And so the trees kept their secrets. What has been discovered in recent decades by archaeologists, loggers, storm clearance crews, and ordinary people walking through ordinary woodlands has begun to paint a picture that is nothing short of staggering. Across Europe, across Asia, across the deep jungles of South America, and the ancient forests of the Indian subcontinent, trees have been found to contain within them objects of extraordinary value and historical significance. Jewelry crafted from gold so pure it has not tarnished in 300 years. Artifacts bearing royal insignia of dynasties that history books barely mention. Religious icons of immense spiritual importance. Personal items, lockets, rings, pendants, whose inscriptions speak of love and loss and desperation in languages that took scholars years to decipher. Each piece tells a story. And each story ends at the same place, the edge of a forest in the dark with someone who had run out of options. Picture the scene because it deserves to be seen. It is night and the kind of darkness that only exists before electricity rewrote the world. The moon is unreliable, ducking behind clouds, offering light and then snatching it back. A figure, perhaps a woman, because history's most extraordinary acts of preservation have so often been carried out by women, moves through the trees with the specific, purposeful silence of someone who has been here before. She knows this forest, she grew up in its shadow. She played beneath these trees as a child, and now at the end of everything, she has returned to it. In her hands, wrapped in cloth that was once fine but is now torn and soul-darkened, is everything she has left. The jewelry that came down through her family across 4 generations. The pieces that were worn at weddings, at coronations, at the celebrations of births and the mourning of deaths. Each piece a chapter of a family history that she knows will not survive what is coming. The soldiers are 3 days behind her, maybe 2, maybe less. She does not have the luxury of permanence. She does not have a box of lead or a chest of iron. She has only this, the forest, and the knowledge that trees are patient, and the desperate, brilliant, heartbroken hope that someday, someone she will never meet will find what she leaves behind. She chooses her tree carefully. There is an intimacy to this act that is almost unbearable to contemplate. She presses the wrapped bundle against the bark. She uses what she has, cord, strips of cloth, her own hands pressing the pieces into a natural hollow in the wood. She doesn't know, of course, that the tree will do the rest. She doesn't know about growth rings or the science of how living wood slowly, inexorably consumes what touches it. She only knows that she is trusting this tree with everything that remains of her world. And then she walks away into the dark and the forest closes behind her like a curtain. The tree grows. Seasons pass, years stack upon years like the rings themselves, each one a small, silent addition to the conspiracy of preservation. The cloth rots away. But the metal, gold, silver, gemstone settings of extraordinary craft, the metal does not rot, it endures. And the tree grows around it with something that, if you allow yourself to feel it for a moment, resembles tenderness. 50 years pass, 100. The person who hid those pieces is a memory of a memory. The world they were hiding from has itself been buried by subsequent catastrophes, subsequent empires, subsequent forgettings. The jewelry sits in its wooden vault, untouched, unseen, held in the heartwood of a living creature that continues to grow silently in a forest that continues to grow silently around it. And then, decades later, centuries later, the chainsaw, the accidental discovery. The moment when time collapses on itself, and a logger in work boots, and a hard hat is suddenly standing in the presence of something that carries within it the grief, and the love, and the survival instinct of a human being who has been dead for 3 centuries. The weight of that moment is not something that can be measured in dollars, though the dollar value of what has been found in trees around the world is, by conservative estimates, in the hundreds of millions. In 2012, a cache of medieval jewelry was found embedded in the trunk of a tree in Central Europe, pieces that dated to the 14th century. Of a craftsmanship so extraordinary that museum curators wept when they first examined them. In the dense forests of Southeast Asia, loggers working in protected old-growth timber have occasionally and illegally, it must be said, encountered artifacts of such antiquity and such beauty that entire logging operations have been quietly halted, while the pieces were spirited away to private collectors, never to be seen publicly again. And this is where the story turns darker. This is where it stops being merely extraordinary and starts being something that demands our moral attention. Because not all of these discoveries make it to a museum. Not all of them make it to an archaeologist's careful hands or a government registry or a historical record. The black market for ancient artifacts is, by the CIA's own published estimates, the 3rd largest criminal enterprise on the planet, sitting comfortably behind only drug trafficking and the arms trade. And the objects that emerge from trees from these accidental time capsules are particularly prized on that market because their provenance is uncertain, their ownership is legally murky, and their age can often only be established by the rings of the wood that held them. They are, in the language of the trade, untraceable. They are, in the language of history, irreplaceable. Every piece that disappears into a private collection takes with it an entire chapter of the human story. Every piece that is sold in the dark and the silence takes with it the answer to a question that civilization was only just beginning to ask. Who hid this? Why did they hide it? What world were they running from? What world were they hoping would eventually come looking? There is a particular case, one that illustrates everything that took place in the forests of the subcontinent. In a stretch of jungle so dense and so old that the local communities have for centuries referred to it simply as the breathing place, because on still mornings you can hear the forest exhale, a low, barely perceptible sound that could be wind through canopy, or could be something older than wind and more patient than any living thing has a right to be. A tree was felled during a controlled burn operation. It was a massive specimen centuries old, with a trunk so wide that 3 people linking hands could not encircle it. When the tree came down and the workers began the process of sectioning the trunk, their tools encountered resistance. And what emerged from within that trunk, from a depth that indicated it had been placed there no less than 200 years before, probably significantly more, was a collection of jewelry so extraordinary that the photographs, when they finally leaked to the internet, were initially dismissed as fakes. Gold necklaces of a complexity that required magnification to fully appreciate. Rings bearing gemstones of a size and quality that a gemologist who examined them described, in a published account, as among the finest naturally occurring specimens she had ever encountered. And an anklet, a single, extraordinarily ornate anklet that bore an inscription in a script so old that it took the combined efforts of 3 separate linguistic scholars to translate. The translation, when it came, was 4 words. 4 words that carried the weight of an entire life, an entire loss, an entire act of impossible hope. The translation was, "For the one who comes." 4 words left in a tree 200 years ago for a stranger who would not arrive for 2 centuries. The jewelry was seized by government authorities, then it was quietly unseized. Then it disappeared. A subsequent investigation found that pieces matching its description had been offered for private sale through channels that no official inquiry has ever fully mapped. The tree, the forest, the discovery, all of it became a footnote in a customs report that itself became classified. The forest kept the secret for 200 years. It took human beings approximately 6 weeks to lose it again. This is the pattern. This is the rhythm that repeats itself throughout every version of this story in every forest on every continent. The natural world preserves with a fidelity and a patience that human institutions simply cannot match. The trees do not have budgets. They do not have political pressures. They do not have black market connections or private collectors willing to wire 8 figures into an offshore account. They simply grow, they simply hold, they simply wait. And yet we keep failing them. We keep arriving with our chainsaws and our greed and our inability to look at something ancient and extraordinary without immediately calculating its dollar value. We keep treating the discoveries as windfalls rather than as responsibilities. We keep forgetting that the person who hid the jewelry, whoever she was, whatever century she lived in, whatever catastrophe she was fleeing, she was not hiding it for a private collector. She was not hiding it for a black market. She was hiding it, perhaps unconsciously, for history. She was making a deposit into a bank that she hoped would still be open when the world became safe enough for her memory to matter. The world has not always honored that deposit. But here is what remains. Here is what the story, for all its darkness and loss and institutional failure, stubbornly insists upon. The trees are still standing. Not all of them, far from all of them. In a world where deforestation is carving away at the old growth, with a speed that would have been unimaginable to the woman in the dark pressing her jewelry against the bark. But enough of them. Enough old trees and enough old forests in enough corners of the world that archaeologists and historians and people who understand what is at stake have quietly, systematically begun to develop what they call in the literature a new discipline, dendroarchaeology, the archaeology of trees. The science of asking not just what the rings tell us about climate and drought, but what the rings might be holding. What unexpected, extraordinary, irreplaceable pieces of the human story might be slowly turning inside the bodies of these vast, patient, ancient living things. Because if the trees that have already been discovered are any indication, and if the mathematics of history, the sheer scale of what was hidden in forests across centuries of conflict and catastrophe, and the desperate human need to preserve what cannot otherwise be protected if those numbers hold, then we are not talking about isolated incidents. We are not talking about a few extraordinary accidents of preservation. We are talking about forests full of artifacts. We are talking about old-growth trees that are, right now, at this moment, holding within their rings objects of immense historical and cultural and artistic significance. We are talking about a treasure that belongs not to any one government, not to any collector, not to any market, but to the story of what it has meant to be human on this planet. Every tree in every ancient forest is potentially a vault. Every ring is potentially a year that contains within it a chapter of history that no book has ever recorded. The jewelry is in there. The artifacts are in there. The hope of someone long dead is in there, pressed against the wood, held in the living heartwood of something that outlasted everything that tried to end it. The forest kept the secret. The question now, the only question that matters, is whether we are worthy of it. The air in those deep places still carries that bite. That feeling of being watched by something that has seen more than you have, that has endured more than you can imagine, that has held more than you will ever know. It is not quite a warning. It is something more like an invitation. Come in, the forest says, walk carefully, look closely. What you're looking for has been here all along, it has been waiting, it has been growing.